Welcome, welcome. Appreciate you joining us. We'll start off with our bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Uh, Here we are. Get the share. Go here. Give me one moment. I just want to make sure that there's no interruptions, etc. And I'm trusting you can see the share at this point. So we are in, of course, a very disturbing Torah portion, but also perhaps a very important watershed, perhaps, Torah portion of Ki Tissa, which comes slap bang in the middle of the chapters that deal with the construction and the implementation of the Mishkan, of the sanctuary. And we start off innocently enough, and we're still in this part, just coming to the end of it, about the actual having been given the instructions concerning the Mishkan and Aaron's vestments and the actual ceremonies to invest Aaron and his sons into the priesthood. We are now told here Moses is told to find Bezalel and his assistant to come and supervise the construction of the various components of the Mishkan and the vestments, and how this is to take place. So we're just finishing up that little section here about the details regarding this. Ve'et shemen hamishcha, which would mean the oil of anointing, the anointing oil. Ve'ektoret hasamim lakodesh, and the incense, the spices, the spices for incense for the sanctuary. Kachol asher tziviticha yasu, just as I have commanded you, this is God speaking to Moses, let them do, they should do. So we'll take a look at the Rashi here. Ve'et ketoret hasamim lakodesh, the spices for incense for the sanctuary. So he says, letzorech haketoret ha'echal, he says this is required for the ketoret, for the incense in the hall of the temple, shehu kodesh, which is a sanctuary. So, of course, this isn't the temple in this case. Literally, it's the Mishkan, but it's talking about that inner area, that building that was in the enclosure. And there was this altar that made out of gold that was specifically there for the purpose of burning incense. There was an incense altar in the center of that second room that was there, right outside the Holy of Holies. So that's the Kodesh, and of course, where the ark was and separated off was the Kodesh HaKodashim. There were these degrees of holiness associated with it. So, going on. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe lemor, and Hashem spoke to Moses, saying, Va'ata daber el bnei Israel lemor, and as for you, speak to the children of Israel, saying, Ach, however, et shabtotai tishmoru, you shall observe, you shall guard my Sabbaths. Ki ot he, because it is a sign, between me, uveinechem, and between you, ledorotechem, for all generations. Ladad, to know, ki ani Hashem mekadishchem, to know that I, the Lord, am sanctify you. And this paragraph seems totally out of context in what we have read. At least superficially, it appears out of context. And this is very significant because the mentioning of Shabbat and the cessation of labor on Shabbat is mentioned actually at least twice that I can think of in the context of building the sanctuary. So it's very interesting. We know that when it comes to the actual mitzvot, the commandments regarding the Sabbath, they are not specifically mentioned very much in the Torah at all. There perhaps are three. There's the commandment which we read in connection with the gathering of the manna, which has to do with transportation, right? Going out, getting the manna, and bringing it back. That is forbidden on the Sabbath. and we can extrapolate from that. There's also another mitzvah mentioned of not kindling a fire on Shabbat. But beyond that, there isn't a lot about specific commandments regarding the Sabbath. And we'll go on with several more sentences regarding the observance of Shabbat in the midst of the construction of the sanctuary and the dedication and all these laws concerning the Mishkan. And we'll take a look at the Rashi and see this word ach that's at the beginning here is an exclusionary, right here. This word comes to indicate an exclusionary law, that the law is an exceptional situation. And let's do the Rashi, and then I'd like to comment further on this. I'm so glad we are doing this. It is really a key piece. Va'ata daber el bnei Israel. As for you, speak to the children of Israel. This, I suspect, comes as opposed to Bezalel, and I think I don't want to be wrong. I'm trying to think of his name, and it's escaping me right now. I don't know if it's. I'm trying to think. I just can't. I don't want to say Achi Samach from the tribe of Dan. I think so. I'm not certain. So, at any rate, Va'ata, that is to say, and as for you, Afalpi, despite the fact Shehifkadaticha litzavtam or litzavotam al melechet hamishkan, despite the fact that I have commanded you, right? I have appointed you to command them regarding the construction of the Mishkan. Al yakel beinecha. This, it should not appear small to you. It shouldn't appear light or unimportant to you. Lidchot et haShabbat. In other words, so as to push aside the Sabbath, mipnei otam melacha, on account of that labor. Here's the point. The point is that you could not consider anything perhaps more of a highlight to the exodus from Egypt than ultimately the building of the temple, but right now the fact that God precedes that right now because he's wants so much to have a relationship with the Jewish people, a close relationship, that he commands them to build this Mishkan in the desert and to have this amazing relationship with God through the construction and the Mishkan itself, and saying that the construction of the Mishkan is of less importance than the observance of the Sabbath. That is profound. And that's what he's saying here. He's saying that constructing the Mishkan as it is, and as wonderful as it is, isn't as important as observing the Sabbath. And the idea of ceasing from prohibited labor on the Sabbath is so important that it pushes aside the construction of the Mishkan. So I want to go on with something else. You know that an important point that I discovered in the course of my studies is how the Mishkan is supposed to represent us. And in that sense, the Mishkan, even though the temple has been destroyed, the real message about each one of us being a Mishkan, each one of us being a temple, fits so well with this idea. That part of our devotion, that on the one hand, the whole purpose of our existence, each one of us individuals and as a group, is in the service of our Creator. That to be able to devote our lives, and of course, that doesn't mean that we don't have a lot of different things to accomplish and a lot of different abilities and talents, etc., and duties, but nevertheless, that ultimately they all are there in the service of our Creator. And that part of the service of our Creator is to move away from the Mishkan element and simply cease that in itself is an incredible act of service. That sometimes not doing physical labor, especially because it has to do with engaging in the physical world, is also part of human existence, which has its own dots to connect. and that it is so amazing that this is here. I will mention that the reason why I believe it's mentioned twice is because were it only mentioned once, we would apply it simply to the construction of the Mishkan. But because it's mentioned more than once, it now becomes extrapolated to mean this is how our tradition takes it, is that any activity that is akin to the building of the Mishkan, which they extrapolate to 39 specific acts of creation or acts of labor, and all sub-acts that are connected to that are prohibited on the Shabbat. And that we should be able to find a way to understand a deeper level of our own existence by not doing that. And the second time it's mentioned is to underpin the idea that it isn't just in connection with the construction of the Mishkan, but it has to do with in general and the ability to extrapolate these 39 different what are called malachot. So it's not avodah. The word avodah actually, which is very often translated as work, actually means service. Melacha is the word that refers to labor that is forbidden on the Shabbat. So let me go on with this a little bit. Ach et shabtotai tishmoro. So it says, but however you shall observe, you shall guard my Sabbaths. Notice the plural. Going on to emphasize, Afalpi, Shetiyu Redufin Uzrizin Bezrizut Hamalacha, despite the fact that you are striving and industrious in the industry of the melacha. There's the word melacha, right? Here meaning the construction of the tabernacle. Okay. Shabbat al tidche. However, you should not push aside the Sabbath, the paneha, from it. In other words, all this excitement and work and labor in the construction of the tabernacle cannot push aside the observance of the Shabbat. Kol achi, now he makes a general observation, Rashi. All achs, the word ach, verakin, or the word rak. If the word ach or rak precedes a law, right? Mi'utin, okay? They represent some kind of exclusion, right? And in this case, we're saying that on the one hand, you're commanded to build the tabernacle, however, right? So, however, when it comes to the Shabbat, that excludes the building of the tabernacle. Lema'et Shabbat mimelechet hamishkan, right? So it comes to set apart the Sabbath from the construction of the tabernacle. And going on, ki othu beini uveinechem. So when you say it is a sign between me and you, that this Sabbath, the idea of resting on the Shabbat, of ceasing from labor on Shabbat, actually has, you could say, mystic implications. That it actually is a sign of divine proximity. Ot gedolahi, it is a great sign, beinenu, between us, shebacharti bachem, that I have chosen you, v'hanchili lachem et yom menuchati, in that I have given you as an inheritance my day of rest, lemenucha, for your rest. Very, very deep stuff going on here. And it explains in some ways why the Sabbath is one of the 10 commandments. Ladat, to know. Ha'umot ba, right? Ki ani Hashem mekadishkim. So ladat ha'umot, in other words, this is to let the nations know through it that I, the Lord, sanctify you. So again, sanctify, make significant, make special, etc. Ushmartem, going on. Ushmartem et hashabbat, and you shall guard my Sabbath, ki kodesh hilachem, for it is sanctified to you, or it is a sanctified thing. It is a point of significance for you. Mechalaleha, those who profane it, not an easy sentence coming up, mot yumat, shall certainly die. Ki chol ha'oseh b'malacha, for anyone who performs work, labor on it, v'nichreta ha'nefesh hahi l'kerev ha'meha, that soul will be cut off from the midst of its people. I know this is very hard to absorb or to digest. Let's take a look. Okay, so it is a capital issue, right? That's the whole point about the Shabbat. But I honestly think that part of the reason for making it so severe is because clearly it is so easy to violate. It is something that the average person would not really think was that important. And the proof, of course, is in the pudding. So I think that is one of the reasons, again, looking at the Torah, not only as a legal document, but as a literary document, and to understand what the Torah is telling us is just how important this really is. Mot yumat, right, shall certainly die. This, and then going on to the application of it, im yesh edim v'hatra'ah, if there were witnesses and forewarning. This, in this case, is seen as a commandment to a court to use capital punishment for a person who violates the Sabbath. So where there is a Sanhedrin and where there is a court that has the authority to exact capital punishment, but the point is there have to be full knowledge on the part of the person committing that violation of the Shabbat. And the way in which you try to determine it is that there have to be witnesses, eyewitnesses, not circumstantial evidence that is inadmissible. It has to be eyewitness, and also the person committing it has to be fully conscious that what they're doing is in fact a violation of the Shabbat, because there's every possibility that they don't know that that particular act they're doing is in fact a violation. There's a possibility that they're not aware of what we're reading here. They're not aware that it's a capital punishment, or they're not aware that it's even Shabbos. They're not aware of it is. So those have to be satisfied. And of course, in actual application, it's going to get steamier for sure. V'nichreta. So this is this divine punishment of karet, and he says in the case the lo hatra'ah, this is in a case where the person wasn't forewarned. In other words, in this case, it has to be a divine punishment because God would know if that person was intentionally violating the Shabbat. So that's why it cannot be done by a human court, because it's not for a human court to attempt to read people's minds. Nachalaleha, those who profane it. Hanoheg ba chol bekdushata. In other words, one, Rashi spells it out, he says, one who acts on it, right, who treats it as a common workday, as a non-holy day, bekdushata, in terms of its holiness, and treats it as an unholy day. And I think this might be, let me see, I'll go on maybe a little bit more. This is the toughest little part of it. Okay. All right. There's more than we can probably accomplish, but I'll keep going. Sheshet yamim ye'aseh malacha. For 6 days, malacha, there's that word, right? This labor may be performed. Uvayom hashvi'i, but on the 7th day, Shabbat Shabbaton, it is a Sabbath. It is I guess I could translate it. It's a Sabbath of rest, because that's basically what the word Shabbat means, a cessation of labor. Kodesh lalunai, sanctified to God. Kol ha'oseh melacha Bayom HaShabbat. Anyone who performs malacha on the Sabbath day, mot yomat. So we repeat the warning, right? Okay. Here we go. Shabbat, Shabbaton. This is how Rashi is going to translate it, right? Menuchat Margoa. In other words, we need to, when we do this, it needs to be a rest of that is intentional. In other words, that you intentionally treat the day as a day to cease from any labor. V'lo menuchat arai, and it is not casual resting. So exactly what that means probably requires a little bit further development, but the idea, though, is that there's an intentional idea. It's not just I guess maybe we could say it's not just sort of taking a vacation. It is an idea of that this day is set apart not to do other kinds of things that we do during the rest of the week. And in that sense is a purposeful act of resting. Again, another statement, Shabbat Shabbaton, L'chach kaflu hakatuv. So for this reason, the text doubles up this word, right? Lomar, to say, she'asur b'chol melacha, that any kind of labor is forbidden, afilu ochel nefesh. Okay, so this is the idea that even preparing food that you need, ochel nefesh means food that you eat on the day, right? It's because obviously we can prepare food for the future. So ochel nefesh has to do with food that we're going to eat that day. So in other words, that we should not be even doing that on the Shabbat, v'chein Yom HaKippurim. And for that reason, when it comes to the mitzvah of Yom Kippur, it also says Shabbat Shabbaton, that you should not be involved in preparing food, or certainly doing things that involve a violation of the Shabbat in preparing food. Shinei Marbo, because regarding it, it says, this is in Leviticus chapter 23, Shabbat Shabbatoni lachem. It shall be a Shabbat Shabbaton to you. Asur b'chol melacha, you're forbidden. This is on the seventh day Shabbat. You're forbidden in any kind of labor. Aval, however, Yom Tov, when it comes to a festival, which is also referred to as a Shabbat, but it's not referred to as a Shabbat Shabbaton, right? Lo ne'emar bo. It doesn't say regarding any of the other Yom Tovim that are mentioned in connection with the festivals in which Yom Kippur is listed. It's only Yom Kippur that's listed as Shabbat Shabbaton, but none of the other festivals are listed as Shabbat Shabbaton. Ki im b'yom harishon Shabbaton, and it says for if. Sorry, let me make sure I'm saying this right. Lo ne'emar bo ki im b'yom harishon Shabbaton u'vayom hashmini Shabbaton, where it says on the first day it is a Shabbaton, and on the seventh day, on the eighth day it says a Shabbaton. Asurim b'chol melechet avodah. So in that case, when it says simply that it's a Shabbaton, it doesn't say Shabbat Shabbaton. We're forbidden any kind of labor, physical labor. Umutarim melechet ochel nefesh. However, one is permitted to cook food on the days of Yom Tov. So here in the wording of this particular paragraph, we already see, because it's stated explicitly elsewhere, that you can prepare food on Yom Tov and just not on Shabbat. Kodesh Lashem, sanctified to God. Shmirat Kedusha Ta, that the observance, the guarding of its sanctity, Lishmi Uva Mitzvotai, that it is for my sake, it is for the sake of God and for God's commandments. Going on. The Shamru, this is very familiar because this is part of our Shabbat liturgy. The Shamru v'nei Yisrael, keep going, et HaShabbat, and the people of Israel, the children of Israel would guard the Sabbath, Lasot et HaShabbat. In other words, they shall guard the Sabbath, Lasot et HaShabbat, to perform the Shabbat. Ladoratam, for generations, Brit Olam, as an everlasting covenant. So this we remember, right? This is the part that we quote. Let's take a look at this. We'll probably have to stop here. Let's go here, see if there's no Rashi on this. So I'll keep going. I'll finish it up. Beini uvein bnei Israel, between me and the children, and between the children of Israel, ot hi leolam. It is an everlasting sign. Ki sheshit yamim asa Hashem et hashamayim, that on 6 days Hashem made the heavens, the et haaretz, and the earth, uvayom hashvi'i, but on the 7th day, Shavat, he rested, vayinafash, and he refreshed himself. So let's take a look see if there's anything more here. Yes, vayinafash. So the Targum says Vanach, simply, and he rested. Vanach. V'chol lashon nofesh. And this, when it uses this term nofesh, right? Hu lashon nefesh shemeshiv. It has to do with the idea of soul, right? One's soul. Shemeshiv nafsho v'nishmato. That it is a way of refreshing your soul, nunashimato, and your breath. So if you want an image, it's like you're running and running and doing, and you're panting and you're out of breath, and resting allows you then to get your breath back. When he rests, mitorach hamalacha, from the difficulty, the hard work of the labor, and regarding which it is written in Isaiah, lo yi'af, it says there, he will not weary, v'lo yi'agea, and he will not get worn out, v'chol po'olo v'ma'amar, and all his labor, v'ma'amar hakatuv, where Scripture states, menucha la'atzmo, in other words, rest for himself, the shaber ha'ozen. This sounds like it's saying that it is as a metaphor. Ma shehu yichola lishmoa. So, in other words, I think, okay, I know what it's saying here. It's saying that in God talking about resting himself, right? He's saying this is just the fact that it's using it metaphorically so that we can understand it better. But the fact is that we can't really understand what it is when God says God rested. We're simply trying to use language in a way that we can get the point of what's being said. And I'll stop here. So this is a really profound passage. And as I said, it comes right in the middle of the construction of the tabernacle. Yes, David. Hi.
So, yeah, hi. So, a question here. It seems that so putting aside the Mishkan for the temple, sorry, for the Sabbath seems okay. So that we talked about, or you mentioned before, the Mishkan represents, the body, right? And or represents partially our body. And it seems that if you don't work on the Mishkan on the Sabbath, then it's basically saying we're not continuing to work on our body or ourselves. But I guess my question is it really that we're talking about the Mishkan representing the physical body, which holds our spirit, and therefore we definitely don't want to work on that during the Sabbath, because the point of the Sabbath is to develop our spiritual self. So is that why the Sabbath is put ahead of working on the Mishkan? I mean, right. I'm just curious.
Okay. So I think we could go further with it. I think you essentially got the point. So the idea is that our presence here physically is so brief, and as grand and as magnificent as the physical world may be, it is infinitesimal compared to the spiritual element. And there's also an understanding of the Sabbath as being a little taste of immortality. That because that's exactly what happens when we die. We are no longer engaged with the physical world. And it's as if God is giving us a little foretaste to reassure us that there's more to life than what we achieve in accomplishing our physical goals. So there's that element to it, that very deeply part of what's going on here as well. And to understand that in observing the Sabbath, because truthfully, as Isaiah puts it, is there any house that we could ever build that could somehow encompass the grandeur and glory of God? There's nothing we could do. I mean, Solomon himself in his magnificent temple says that. So that in a sense, not the idea is that dedicating ourselves to doing what God has commanded us to do is the greatest sanctuary we could ever build. And sometimes that involves in doing things, and sometimes it involves in not doing things. Yeah,
That
Harlan,
helps.
thank you.
On there is a prohibition on the Sabbath, and to save a life, you can not do the Sabbath.
Right.
Also on a bris, on a baby, 8 weeks, you can also do that bris.
Right.
So that's okay. Those two things are okay on a Sabbath.
Right.
Okay. Also, there's 39 laborers that came from building the Mishkan.
Right.
And I'm trying to memorize all 39, so I won't.
Good luck.
Yeah, I won't.
Okay.
Won't be.
I don't
I
think.
won't destroy my Sabbath.
No,
So.
it's okay. Harlan, I don't think you have to approach it in that particular way. Okay. I mean, I think that the point, it's important, but I think that it's fairly, it's not that difficult to figure out what might be a violation of the Sabbath and what might not be a violation of the Sabbath. Maybe I'm misspeaking myself, but I think in general, we understand what it is to violate the Sabbath. And the 39 things are there in some ways, I think, to give us a connection to the level of holiness involved in not violating the Sabbath. And I think we need to stop here. So I'm going to stop the recording, but thank you.